Currently, I have over 100 books in my apartment. More than some people, but definitely less than a lot of people out there. And I make a point of donating my books whenever I don't feel particularly attached to them anymore, or passing them on to friends and family. There are also books that I own digitally, either on my Kindle or as audiobooks. There's also the books that I borrowed from friends and libraries over the years. Have I read all of the books that I own? Absolutely not. Which is weird, isn't it? And I know I'm not alone in that. When people ask me what my hobbies are, I usually throw reading in there, just because it is something that I find myself returning to over and over again. And I tend to have like reading phases, but I have a feeling that I own more books than I've actually read, which raises the question, do I like reading or do I like just buying books? And I think the answer might get a little bit complicated. In an attempt to answer that question, I went through and categorized all of the books that I physically own. And I would be happy if I had read maybe like 55–60% of the books that I own. But when I got to taking inventory, I noticed a couple of things. To start with, I've read 85 of the books that I currently own. And then of those 85, 24 are books that I've returned to at least once, if not multiple times. I also own multiple editions of 5 books. 19 of the books that I own were, let's call them school inflicted. 37 are sitting on my TBR list. I'm currently reading 2, and I've truly abandoned or DNF'd 4 books, which means it's probably time to donate those. Once I started trying to fit my books into categories, I realized I kind of have a type, or several, kind of like genres that I was pulled towards and that all of my books fell into. So here's a visual of that. One thing I wonder is when we get to the breakdown, how many of these books and genres do I actually enjoy? And do I keep any books because they're like a physical representation of what I'm trying to portray myself as? If you think of a bookshelf like clothing, you have certain clothes for like functionality. They're comfortable, they're easy to move in, they keep you cool during the summer. And then you have certain clothes for purely aesthetics. They might not be the most convenient to wear, but they help you embody like your inner self. And I have a feeling that books can kind of do a similar thing. With that in mind, let's go to with us talking about how books can reflect the inner self. We start getting into the territory of what is expressive and what is performative. I think there are definitely people out there who own books primarily because of what it communicates to other people, but maybe they don't read it or it just sits as decoration. That's kind of what I mean by performative. But where do you fit in the books that you like aspire to? At one point in time, I decided to challenge myself. I was going to start reading more of like the literary classics, things that you might see in an English class. There's a lot that we didn't cover in my education, but I wanted to expand my vocabulary and understanding of the world and different like points in history. And then I started to realize that some books kind of have their own time. And here's kind of what I mean by that. When I was in high school, for one of my English classes, we were assigned to read Jane Eyre. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not get past the Red Room, which is very early on in the book. At the time, I didn't have any expectations for what I was getting myself into, and I struggled with trying to get pulled into the story. I had a hard time relating to characters, and the language was a little bit difficult for me. It was one of those situations where you read a paragraph, and then you read the next one, and then you read the next one, and your thoughts kind of go, and then you realize, oh, I have no clue what I just read. And so eventually I turned to, what was it, Spark Notes, to get through that module. Then, about 10 years later, I had an urge to try again, and this time I loved it. Suddenly, there were moments that resonated with me in a way that never could have for 15-year-old Sydney. Jane Eyre had not changed. I had simply lived more life. And that's not just a one-off. Like, I strongly believe that if I had not read The Death of Ivan Ilyich after the death of somebody that I was close to, then the story wouldn't have resonated with me in the same way, and I wouldn't be able to draw the same parallels between the characters, like what they were going through and what happened in real life. That's why I have books sitting on my shelf that I intend to read, just not today, maybe not even this year. They aren't there because I am avoiding them. If anything, it's the opposite. They're there because I believe that they'll mean more to me if I meet them at the right time. One thing that actually surprised me is that my TBR list, like the books that I realistically think that I can get through before the end of the year, is really only 4 books long. And that might seem incredibly low, but we also have to consider that in this situation, we're talking about physical books. And the reality is that for the books that I'm going to be reading in the near future, most of them aren't physical at all. They're audiobooks. The 4 that I do have in my apartment are actually a loan from my friend Kayla, a loan from my cousin, and then 2 that my cousin gifted me a while back that I feel like she's probably going to be disappointed if I don't eventually get through this series. I still prefer sitting down with a physical book, but audiobooks are able to fit into my life where a physical book just can't. I can listen while I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, showering, driving. I wish I was the kind of person that could like listen to an audiobook or even music during work, but I just get a little bit too invested. My focus just like immediately gets pulled to whatever I'm listening to. So that's never really been an option for me, unless it's a song that I know well and I have on repeat, and it just kind of becomes background at that point. But doing that just absolutely obliterates my Spotify analytics. Point is, when I read a physical book, I kind of have to stop everything else and pay attention to what's immediately in front of me. But audiobooks let me take the story along. Overall, audiobooks are just the format that fits my life best right now. Earlier, I mapped out the themes that kept showing up while taking inventory of my bookshelves, and while it's not super accurate, I feel like it can give you a pretty good idea of the types of genres or like themes, again, that I enjoy. When it comes to actual books that I've read, will the chart tell the same story? Let's start with a breakdown of all of the physical books that I own. You can definitely see a good overlap between this chart and the bubbles. Going into this, I assumed that I would have way more books under the romantasy genre. But when I got to counting, I realized there were several book sets that I owned that in my mind really only got tallied as one. So, for example, my Game of Thrones box set. So I was surprised when I started counting my fantasy adventure books, and they exactly equaled my romantasy collection. I also realized that there are some genres that I just don't get into much: mysteries, horror, sci fi. To be fair, I did read and I loved Project Hail Mary, but that was a book that I had borrowed from and returned to my friend Kayla. What's really interesting is how the numbers compare when we put together all of the books that I own and all of the books that I've actually read. Suddenly, we're much closer to the ratios I was expecting. Romantasy takes the lead by a wide margin, followed by my YA books, and the percentage of my textbooks didn't really change that much, but my fantasy adventure books dropped pretty significantly. Every other category lost a few percentage points except for children's, where there was only 1 book to begin with. What surprised me the most, though, is that I had assumed 40 to 50% of my books had sat unread. Instead, that number ended up being 32%, which I feel like is a pretty healthy ratio. I mentioned a little bit earlier that some of the books that I own are actually duplicate copies, and I don't own many of those, but I have noticed how often recently, for the last like 2 to 3 years, publishers have been essentially releasing their own special edition copies of their most popular books. Ones with special sprayed edges, like bonus chapters that you can only buy from specific store chains, covers changing for an entire series as soon as a new one gets released. It's all a lot to keep up with. For a good chunk of the books that I have multiple copies of, it was mostly on accident. I've moved so many times in the last decade, and usually the way it would work is that I would pack up all my stuff, go to stay at my dad's house for a couple of days, and kind of reorganize while I was there, and then take what I want with me to the new apartment. And that's the way that I kind of worked things until just recently when my dad actually ended up moving. And prior to him doing that, he asked me to kind of go through the room and see if there's anything that I wanted to bring with me or if there's anything that I wanted to donate. And when I was sorting through my boxes, I ended up finding a box of books that I had kept. And in there, I had certain series that I had my original copies of. So now I keep those as a keepsake. One of the books that I'm currently reading is Dante's Inferno. In my copy of it, I've been writing a ton of notes in the margins, but the other day, I was actually gifted by a family member a copy of Paradise Lost, which is the whole collection of it. And the cool thing is that it's from the 1940s and it's in beautiful condition. So I don't want to add my annotations to this very old book. There are a few books that I have special copies of, and it's primarily because I just love these series. First, I have the illustrated copy of The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. And the thing is that I love this series. It has such distinct mental imagery for me, so it ends up being kind of fun to compare my mental image against obviously like the movies and against like what is actually illustrated. And the other two that I have are The Wolf King and The Night Prince by Lauren Palfreyman. This is currently one of my favorite series, and I am so excited for next year when we get the final book. The thing was, when I found these books, it was right around the same time that the author ended up signing on with her current publisher. So I got excited and I wanted to show my support. And so I ended up buying the special editions. These versions are really cool because of their level of detail. Like, there's full art on the edges, and then on the inside you've got art. There's alternative covers, and then there's the alternative like hard book cover. It's all very, very cool. And for The Night Prince specifically, the author ended up making a post on Instagram where she had discussed like her inspiration for the castle that's featured. The cool thing is that I've actually been to that castle in Scotland. So I don't know, I feel a personal connection to the book, if that makes sense. So the question I initially set out to answer was, do we like reading or do we simply like buying books? And kind of as I predicted, the answer ended up being a little bit more nuanced. My percentages obviously aren't going to reflect everyone. This is just my experience with books. I've read almost 70% of what I own. Of what's left, some are on my TBR, some I'm waiting to read at the right time, and there's a small portion that for one reason or another, they kind of mean something to me. Ultimately, I think I've landed on an interesting thought. A bookshelf isn't just a record of what you've read. It's a reflection of your relationship with reading. Some books represent who you were, who you are becoming, and what actually matters to you. And this is only my physical copies, so it's not even a full reflection of myself. And I don't mind that so much. So now I'm curious. If you took inventory of your bookshelves, what would they say about you? Have you ever reread a book and realized that it had changed? Not because the book itself was different, but because you were. Are you one of the people who, by definition, has their own library? That number is 1,000, by the way. Hope to see your answers in the comments below. If you liked my silly attempt at trying to understand my own bookshelves, feel free to like and subscribe so you can catch my next video where I'm most likely going to be doing something very simple since I will be recovering from surgery. Wish me luck!